Interesting past week. Weather-wise was pretty good for the most part. Water levels were kind of all over the place. Nothing really uh, heavy came in. Most of it was on the lower ends, close to negative tides. And of course, we got some negative tides over this past weekend. We had a couple little fronts push through. Nothing that drastically changed things, not temperature-wise, but it did push some water out. And then, of course, the water came back, and they had another little front, and it pushed it back out again. A little cooler air there, but what that does is it actually kind of changes your fishing somewhat, being that they're not a super hard front. Again, they're just kind of two fronts that were back to back over the past week. It just kind of changed things over 2 or 3 days, so you had to really be able to adjust. Fishing down here on the back shoreline on the Madre side, kind of up here toward old Texas Parks and Wildlife building that's up in there, and then back in here to Bray Cove, all these areas back in here, fishing these back lake mouths is kind of what we were still focusing on, much like we do on some of the other areas. Get up there in San Antonio Bay and you fish a lot of those back lakes, especially when the water levels drop out to a pretty low number. You have to really kind of have to adjust. So I like to fish this back lake here, and you got 2 or 3 back lake mouths that come out here. And then you got the big lake that's here. Now there was a couple of days, or excuse me, there was one day that we were up in here, and we were able to drop the boat on the outside and wade up in here. And this was all pretty much about knee-deep water on the particular day. So the one thing that we threw some plastics, but I kind of wanted to experiment, and I pulled out the top water and just kind of hammered on the top water for 2 or 3 hours and just prospected the water. And we had some really good opportunities. So as after that happened, I was kind of like, okay, let's next location that we get to, or the next day we get to, let's see what the topwater action is. So I threw a lot of topwater bait this past week, and got lots of opportunities, a lot of blow ups, a lot of lookies, follows, takes. So it was real nice selection of different opportunities in there. So if you're a topwater junkie, and with the weather lining up to the way that it's supposed to this upcoming week, we're supposed to be in the 80s the majority of this week. This is the start of the Texas spring breaks, one of the first 2 weeks. So this would be a great opportunity if you're a topwater junkie, man, is get out there and tie one of those suckers on and go to work with it. Now, one thing about it is you have to really stay dedicated to it, because it's not an instant gratification thing. So that was the one thing that was noticeable. It was a dedicate yourself to it for 2 to 3 hours and just throw it. Whether you get 1 blow up or 50 blow ups or 2 or 3 takes, whatever, just let that encourage and be a building block for you. So I would definitely get your top waters out if you like to do them, and have some fun, man, because there were some great opportunities. Nothing like a great topwater bite. So, and then, of course, we had the opportunities with the plastics back in here as well. And then, of course, we came out on the outside, working a little bit of the shoreline in here and a little bit of the shell. Found a little bit of fish on some shell. It's not to that point yet, like it will be probably in late May and June, July. You may get some toward the April-ish. But, we did find a couple of fish here and there on some shell, but it wasn't like hardcore like it will be later on. But still, your main structure that we're looking at is mud, grass, potholes. Those are the things that we're focusing on. Of course, this shoreline lends itself to do that in different areas, and you got different opportunities in some little back lakes. And that's why I say when this water level is about knee to just above knee deep, man, I like to really chunk those topwater baits in there and just see what happens and let it go to town. Working this whole back shoreline up here in Mesquite. Lots outside of the topwater bait. A lot of the baits that were thrown was the main color that really stuck out this past week was watermelon red. Did not matter what brand, if it was Coastal Brew, Pav Lures, Down South, Knock and Tail, Mirror Lures, Mirror Lure Little Johns and Little John XL. Both were good because we're in those transition days heading up to a full moon, and we will be in a full moon here in a couple of days. So make sure that you keep that in mind. You may want to start out with a smaller profile for the big moon. So those fish will be predominantly night feeding. If you're a night fisherman, you like to go fish at night, this is a great opportunity with that big moon in play. happening. So there's some great opportunities there. And if you've never thrown a topwater bait at nighttime, woo, it's pretty invigorating, man. That is a lot of fun to be able to do that. So if that's something that's on your radar in this coming week, you might want to get your opportunity if you're going to be able to be out on the water. So anyhow, like I say, the watermelon red and all the different brands was very good. Twisted Tea, and so it's in the down south, so the Twisted Tea, Big Papa, watermelon red, let's see, white ice, depending on the clarity, was all pretty good for the most part. Magic Grass was another one that kind of stood out to me. That hadn't thrown Magic Grass in a little bit, and so we tied one of those on there, and it did pretty well in the original size and some in the supermodel. And of course, again, the Little Johns, watermelon red primarily in that. Knock and Tail, we've thrown some greenback. They have a watermelon red as well, but it's a smaller version, so it did pretty good. And the Pav Lures and Coastal Brew Bait in their particular flavors of a watermelon red was mixed in there as well. And of course, that was a 4 and 5 inch bait, rat tail that they both make. So it did, a variety of things. Of course, then we sprinkled in some, again, the top water bait was sprinkled in there, at least primarily for me. And then the Soft Dines and Soft Dine XLs kind of closed out with that. But that said, like I say, water levels are kind of all over the water temps are hovering in the mid to upper 60s, and as long as we get this sunshine, those water levels will continue to climb. You're probably touching 70 by the end of the week, if not lower 70s. I'd say 72, 73. And that's just something great to look forward to. And then once you get to that point, you start considering wet wading if you so choose, depending on what your tolerance level is. So, but anyhow, that's kind of what's been going on. It's been happening this past week, and things are going to continue to change as we're kind of in a volatile time of the year in March as we heading into April. Backside of Mud. Again, lower tides this past week. All this area out here on the outer edge, the deeper side of it, right there by the little islands there on the backside of Kelly's Lake, this area back in here, all down through this whole backside here has been pretty good for the most part. A lot of our production's coming in the lake back in this area here, throwing topwaters in there as well. Say I stuck with topwaters this past week a large majority of the time, just for that action to see if there's going to be some consistency across these estuaries. And it's, for the most part, if you were over the right structure and the right time, you got opportunities. And that's all we're really looking for. We're just looking for a few opportunities to see if we can't catch some fish. Some of these other back lakes, there just wasn't enough water in them to really be effective, and there'd be a lot of grass mixed in there with that, so it was really difficult to do that. So we kind of stayed out of those, stayed out on these edges like this, getting some of these lakes that are here close to that. Blind Pass, all this area here, all the way up on the shoreline here, where the ranch house is. Fished all that, and then of course on the backside here over into Allen's, this whole shoreline that ran up into that. So there's variety of fish that hang in there. Primarily just trout and redfish is the main things that we're targeting. Came across an occasional flounder, occasional black drum, but the main things were trout numbers. Very encouraging. This is now being I think going into the third year of where the size and restriction on limit on that is starting to pay dividends, that we're consistently catching trout that are in the new slot is 15 to 20. You can't keep anything from 20 to 30, but we're catching a lot of fish, which is a great thing. Catching a lot of fish that's in that 21 to 25 range on a pretty consistent basis, and then we're catching a lot of 16 to 19s too. So the conservation side of things are working. It's showing. You should have some really good days here on the water if you're going to be able to be out on the water this upcoming week. Fish are still holding over your grass and mud pockets, grass pockets, clump shell. If you can find some deeper water that's adjacent to those areas, you'll do yourself a big favor where you can fish. If you're getting on the water early, with daylight savings times, it has kicked in, so it stays dark later right now until that finally subsides here in about another month or so, month and a half. It's dark early, so we're not getting on the water till like 7:15, maybe even 7:30. And then, of course, now what the great thing about it is you can fish later into the day. You're not having to get off the water and let the sun chase you, or the moon chase you off, should I say. So that's the other great thing about that, is you get longer time on the water. You may start a little later, which is okay, because we've had some cooler temperatures, so it's been all right to start at 8 o'clock, 8:15. It's not been a big deal, and it's been very productive that way. Water temps, like I say, are warming up. They're in the mid to upper 60s, reaching on the 70s. I would anticipate those being in probably the low to mid 70s by the end of this week. Remember that you're in a big moon, so make sure you downsize on your profiles and then adjust accordingly, and go from there. Again, same flavors that we just talked about in the last video. Your down south, Twisted Tea, Big Papa have been good. Watermelon Red has been spectacular. Purple Demon, if there's one that's in there, I think Purple Rain in the down south was pretty good for us as well. Mid-size to larger baits. Now, you may want to go from the original size down south, a 4-inch, down to a 3-inch, like the burner shad, and a bunch of different. Acid Rain was another one in the burner shad that was good for us. White Ice, Bone Diamond, those are normal staples this time of year as well that you can use in and around that. There's been a variety of fish. As far as redfish, there's been a lot of redfish that's been pushed in and around here, so then they're constantly moving. So you have to readjust and refine where they're going to be, but the tactics and what you go about, you're going to be over those edges, shell, grass. As long as you find that, and bait, obviously you got to have bait working there. And when that's not been a problem, there's been still plenty of bait that's working around in here. So as long as we don't get another big, heavy cold front that comes in the next 2 to 3 weeks, our spring is setting up to be spectacular. A lot of fish has been caught, a lot of fish to be caught, a lot of good times that are back in here. So again, if you're able to be out this upcoming week, pay attention to what your tide levels are, because they're fluctuating quite a bit. And then your weather patterns, as far as wind, tides, all that stuff comes into play for you. So don't forget about that stuff. If you're just getting to fish 1 or 2 days in the next week or week and a half or whatever, just pay attention to that kind of stuff, because it's very important. Back here in Swan Lake, the days that we had where we had north, northeast, or northwest wind, Swan Lake always sets up pretty well, because you get protection back in there. Now, depending on where you're coming from, it might be a little bit difficult getting there if you're coming from Copano Bay Bridge, or if you're coming off the 188 sand ramp, which, if you do have a north breeze, that's the one that I would suggest that you go out of if you can get in there, depending on water level, because if it's super low, it's a little difficult getting out of that little ramp, because it's not the greatest, and it's not the little cut that goes out into Port Bay is sometimes it feels like it's silted in. It's pretty muddy in there. So I always go out of Copano Bay Bridge. If I have to take a tail whipping, I take a tail whipping, but that's just part of it. But Swan Lake, again, on those lower tide days, we get off here on the edge of the shoreline there. We're trying to stay in that knee to thigh deep water. So wherever we have to do as far as moving off the shoreline to get to that, of course, if you're right up on the shoreline, you're going to be not even ankle deep. You'd be shin deep water, and you just kind of move yourself out to where you can work that. And then, like I say, there's been fish that's been caught. We've had redfish, trout scattered in here. Not great numbers, but solid enough numbers to get you to be able to get in here. Here in the next, provide, again, what I suggested in the last video is, as long as we don't have a big, hard, heavy cold front that comes in here, you're going to start seeing fish show up on the outside. They're still over mud and grass, but you got more hard-packed sand, and you got an edge out here. So the fish, probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks, month, they're going to start showing up here on this outside if they're not already. We're primarily still fishing over mud, mainly, staying away from the hard-packed stuff. Of course, if you fish back in here, you know how muddy this area is back in here, but it can be really good at times. So it's always a great location to get if you're wanting to fish in Copano and be in this particular area. Swan Lake's always a good little area. And, of course, I like coming out here on the edge, fishing the drop on this stuff out here. And then, of course, if the situation's warrant, then we get over here on Rattlesnake, because it's a big, long point out there. Got great grass beds on it, and so we kind of work that on a particular day and fish the guts that comes through here where the old Redfish Lodge used to be, or where they're going to start building soon. And then you can just fish this back lake, get into Pete's Bend and all this backing area here. So you got lots of opportunity, and you can be protected. You get back in Pete's Bend, it can protect you. And then, of course, if you come around all the way, well, not quite that far out, but if you come all the way down in here to Italian Bend. Italian Bend's another great little area. Depending on which way your wind's coming from, you can stay protected in there. We found fish scattered in here, primarily redfish, occasional trout here or there, but that's been it for the most part for us. And just working these areas, same baits, again, same colors, same sizes, the original size. Again, with the big moon in play that's coming up here in a few days. Start with that smaller profile, I'd say a 4-inch or a 3-inch bait, and then downsize if you need to. And then I think the last full moon that we had, we were throwing some bigger baits in that full moon period and having some decent success with it. So if you throw all sizes during that time frame, that's fine. Don't limit it just to the smaller profile. That's just where I like to start. You always need a starting point, and that's a great place to start. And then you pay attention to what the fish are eating or what they're doing. If you've got more than 2 or 3 people in your party that you're going to fish with, then everybody can kind of throw something big, always something down to small, and then just pay attention to what that is. And then basically your water clarity is going to dictate what flavor baits as far as darks and lights go. If it's more translucence or a darker flavor, then always pay attention to that thing there. Again, different parts of Copano set up really well for a particular wind, what it is. Always pay attention to what that is. I guess say our tides are fluctuating pretty good right now. Like I say, we're in that spring time of the year, so hopefully some water will come back as we have this big moon in play. It doesn't push too much out. Hopefully it'll pull some more back in. So that always helps with the fishing aspect of it as well. So if you're on spring break this upcoming week, y'all have a great week and be safe out on the water.